And we're good to go.
All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. So today marks another part in our series where we're going to talk about another key aspect of graduate admissions, that being interviews. Although sometimes you might not get an interview when you're in grad school, but we'll also do a refresher on CVs and resumes, just so it's, again, solidified in people's minds on how to distinguish between the two and how to create one. So here's some of the basic stuff we're going to cover throughout this presentation. So we're going to discuss what a graduate school interview is, preparing for it, what to do, what not to do, some sample interview questions, to get you to start thinking about some of the answers to those questions. All right. So we'll cover like a few topics, sort of like research experience and skills, initiative, working and learning styles. We'll discuss resumes, building a resume, tips to do that, and CVs, and building those as well as a refresher from last time. So it's similar to a job interview, these graduate school interviews, in the sense what they're trying to accomplish is they're trying to figure out, are you a good candidate for their program? So once you've gone through the application process and you start getting your acceptances and your rejections, you may notice like a trend. You might notice that you got accepted into like a really good school if this happens, or you might be rejected by like a really low tier school, we'll say. And so sometimes it's just graduate school applications can be a crapshoot, but most of the time it's really comes down to, are you a good fit? And the interview is sort of like an extra step that the admissions committees use to try to determine more, as a way to see, okay, well, the application indicates that there's something here, but we want to find out for sure. And sometimes they'll use the interview as a way for you to come in and sort of get to know the program and the school. So I've talked to some admin people here in my physics department, and they said, at least for our university, they use the interview process to try to convince the applicant to actually come here. So when it comes to the interview, it goes both ways. So they're trying to figure out if you're a good fit, and they want you to see that their program is a good fit for you. Okay. So what they will do in this interview is they'll probably like ask you any questions they might have had when they were reading like your resume or your CV, probe a little deeper into your experiences, expand on what you've done in the past and answer your questions again. So it's very important that when you're in this interview, you answer questions as well. And usually with interviews, they typically have like a campus tour since you're already there. I'm not sure how it will be during COVID times, since programs are different, and especially with like the new variants out. So they're more than likely going to be virtual. So you'll probably be like in a Zoom call like this with like a bunch of other faculty and professors, asking you questions, or sometimes they'll actually fly you out. Again, that depends on how the pandemic rolls out in the near future. Okay. So when it comes to preparing for the interview, word of advice is to reread your personal or statement of purpose. So once you've submitted all the application materials, don't just like forget about it. Make sure it's kept in a location that on your computer that you know where to get to and easily find, and then reread what you wrote to this program, so that way you can know exactly what you talked about, because they might ask you questions from those statement of purpose. Like they might say, oh, I see you've worked with so-and-so here in your statement of purpose. Could you elaborate on that experience? Try to read around in your field that you are applying for, or your subject area that you have experience in. They might also ask you questions about those respective fields. And I would try to at least write down 3 good questions that you should ask the interviewers, whether it's about their program or the school. And very important, eat a good breakfast. Be sure that you're not hungry or thirsty. I would have like a bottle of water next to you. I know for me personally, I tend to, when I speak a lot, my mouth tends to dry up. So it's very nice that you have a water bottle if you know that happens to you as well, because the last thing you want to do is be uncomfortable in your interview, because it'll affect how you come across to the interviewers as well. So, be prepared. And so another thing, if this is like a physical interview, make sure you know the location of the interview ahead of time, and make sure you're like up to date with your emails in case they like send you an email about like, a change in the schedule or something like that. Make sure you know the time. It's very important. Okay. All right. So let's go over some of the key things of what to do. So dress for success. You don't want to show up with a t-shirt and just sweats. That's doesn't leave a good lasting impression. So if you have it, try to get like at least for the guys, like a button-up shirt, tie, blazers, something nice that you would wear to like a formal event, but at least for COVID, I think you can get away with just like having business at the top and then just like relaxation at the bottom, so long as you don't stand up during the Zoom interview calls. But yeah, if it's an early, if it's a physical interview, make sure you arrive early, that way in case like something happens that you forgot to take care of, you can easily take care of that ahead of time without being late. Be courteous and respectful. I think that's a given, but again, just to reiterate, a firm handshake, again, if this is like in-person interview, eye contact, don't speak quietly, try to project your voice a little bit. The last thing you want to do is like the interview hear something that they didn't hear correctly, and then they get like the wrong idea of what you said. Okay. One other thing, interviewers or interviewer, try to address them by their title, last name, unless they tell you otherwise. So let's say you're meeting, let's say Dr. Nguyen, and he says, "Oh, just call me Jim." So if they tell you otherwise, just go with what they say. All right. Be sure to respond to the questions they ask you, and if you can, back it up with specific examples. When you use specifics in your responses, it really shows that you've put some thought into your answer and that you actually have the evidence to back it up. It's something that's like a key skill that scientists need when it comes to like, answering questions, whether it's asked by scientists or the general public. Be honest and try to be yourself. It doesn't really help if you sort of lie about who you are, because again, this is to see if you're a good fit for the program, and you won't be in a very nice place if you find out later on that you faked your way into this, and then you've come to find out that the program is not a right fit for you. And I'm not really sure how exactly graduate degree transfers work, but I heard there's a little bit of nuance and some stuff you can't really transfer from different programs. So it's a little bit more difficult to transfer, but it's still possible. But you want to make sure that the program you go into first time around is a good fit. So be sure to take the interview seriously. Try to have like a positive attitude in this interview, because a lot of times some people will pick up on your energy or your vibe. They'll quickly pick up, okay, this person is giving me this idea that like they don't want to be here, or they're really very nervous or something like that, or they're really not thinking positively about their outlooks or anything like that. So that might be a little bit of a red flags to the interviewers. So try to be more confident in your answers and your attitude as well. And if they ask you something you don't understand, or something comes off as wrong, be sure to speak up about it. So, because the last thing, again, you want is for miscommunication to happen and in order to dispel miscommunication, you have to have communication. So if they say something that you heard wrong and you think it was wrong, try to ask like, I'm sorry, could you say that again? You know, it's very important that if something is said wrong or you misunderstand it or don't understand, ask them to repeat or elaborate. You know, there's no shame in asking for elaboration. All right. So what not to do? So first and foremost, very important. Don't be late. Don't make excuses. Doesn't really help with the interviewer's perception of you if you just start babbling out excuses. Don't have, again, contrasting to what we said in the last slide, don't have a negative attitude in the interview, again, because they will pick it up. They will pick up on it. Very important as well. Don't make negative comments about previous employers, professors, or schools, because if you're doing it to those schools, then it's probably likely that you're doing it to their school as well when you're at other schools as well. That's the thought that's going through their head. So if you're doing it to them, so if you're doing it to those schools, what's not to say that you're not doing it to them as well. Don't look desperate. It doesn't really help for your case to be admitted into the program. Also, hygiene is very important if you show up in in-person interviews, you know, unless, because it shows like that personal hygiene is not a concern of yours, which should not be the case. You know, again, on top of like dressing for success, try to make sure that you're clean, you know, especially now during COVID, if it's in person. Try to turn your cell phone off. The last thing you want is for your phone to go off or constantly go off with notifications and interrupting the interview process. Also, this should go without saying, but I will make it known. Don't lie in your interview process, because it might come back to bite you in the ass. So it's best, you know, to again be honest and be yourself. Also, don't try to make the interviewer guess. You know, goes back to what I said previously. You know, try to be clear with your answers. Back it up with specifics. You don't want to leave the interviewer assuming things, because if they assume some things, they might get the wrong idea, or they might perceive something differently than what it truly is. Also, I wasn't aware of this, that this was an actual thing, but apparently it is. So there's been like, I guess, incidents of like people taking their spouses or partners or children's or friends to the interview. Don't do that. Just, they asked to interview you and not the people close around you. So if you so happen to have like a child with you or one of your friends, make sure that they're waiting outside. You know, they don't interfere with the process, but still, just to make sure that everyone is aware of what not to do. So right now we're going to cover some interview questions that you might be asked during the interview. So we'll cover like sort of the questions surrounding research experience and skills. So they might ask you to elaborate on some of the stuff you did in your research. So they might ask you to describe your most significant accomplishment or your most important research experience. And so it really makes you think. And while you're thinking your response, if you have like a bottle of water with you, it works to your advantage, because you can take a sip of water, and that gives you a chance to sort of think and buys you a little more time to formulate an answer. So that's a trick I've learned. So another thing they might ask you is, they'll look at your application and say, hey, you work with this professor. What's he like? Or tell me about that experience. They may ask you about the scientific question or the motivation behind some of your research experience or the experiments that you worked on. You know, what was the hypothesis? Is there any future experiments in your field? You know, they also would like to know how you played a role in those experiments. And they'll look under your skills as well, and they'll see if you worked on like a specific piece of equipment that not everyone has a lot of experience or is pretty hard to master using. So they'll ask you how you've come to learn or your experience or your proficiency with it. All right. Or they might just ask, like, what is this technique? I've actually never heard of it. So be prepared to sort of answer those types of questions in your field. So another thing they'll also try to like determine is your initiative. And so some of the questions that may look like it could be, so why do you want to come to our graduate program? It's sort of like the question, why should we hire you, kind of deal, in the sense. So you should list out your reasons. If you specified your reasons in your personal statement or statement of purpose, I would reuse those reasons as well and maybe elaborate on those too, so that way you're staying consistent. And that really highlights the importance of rereading your application materials ahead of time before the interview. And so another thing they want to see is like, okay, do you have goals? So where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years? Do you have something planned out in the future that you would like to accomplish? What is your next step in your career? Okay. And they'll also ask you what you're interested in science. They might know this, but they also want to see if those interests, again, align with what's on your application, and maybe if like, you're interested in other things, because sometimes, stuff can happen between the application and when you're admitted. It might turn out that the professor you want to work under, all of a sudden, you come to find out isn't doing that research. They may just leave the university. They might die. Just a whole lot of things can happen between then. So they also they want to know if like, you might be open to other areas of science as well. And I know for different fields, they like to do lab rotations as well. So they want to see if you're sort of like open-minded to other sorts of fields. Okay. And so they'll also ask you maybe if you were taking initiative in leadership roles, describe a time in where you were in charge of a project or given some independence and what you accomplished as when you were given that free agency. They also want to know how you work and what your learning styles are, because everyone's different in terms of like their working habits and how they learn. So what motivates you in school, in the lab, pretty basic question. Another one's more of a kind of a work style approach. Do you like to work on several projects at once or one project at a time? They like to see, okay, personally for me, I like working on several projects because it gives me a chance to work on something else if I get stuck on that one project. So again, that comes down to personal preference, and they want to see how you work. Not saying that there is a right or wrong answer to these questions. It's just they want to figure out who you are as a person. They'll ask you how you work as a team, as a part of a team or on your own, and what the end result was when working in such environments. And so they'll also will like to know if you work with like postdocs, graduate students, other undergraduate students in your lab. Is there something you learned from those? Something you may have passed on to those? Again, this goes back to part. If you can somehow say that you taught like more of like the incoming undergraduates in the lab as well as a sort of senior undergraduate researcher, that really helps your case because it shows that you have initiative, you have leadership, and you have the autonomy to function on your own as a researcher and teach others to reach their goals as well. And they also want to know if you're able to solve problems in the lab, and if you've like can function independently of that problem, or if you're able to reach out to others and ask for help. So if you encounter a problem in the lab, would you ask someone for help, or would you try dealing it with yourself? Again, how you answer this, you can answer this in different ways. So one way you can answer this is sort of say, you could try different approaches towards the problem, looking up online to see if anyone else had any issues of these. And then once you've like reached all these roadblocks and you can't get anywhere, that's when you might ask other people's, maybe your PI for advice, rather than just go straight to your PI in the first place, because that shows that you're willing to take care of like problems like these on your own, and seeking help when you can't go past the roadblock by yourself. So another key aspect they might inquire upon is sort of like your decision making and interpersonal skills. So you'll notice that some of these stuff is kind of similar to like a typical job interview. So when I went through like all these questions in my head when writing this, I noticed that some of these questions were kind of the same question that I got asked when I was working in retail on my first job as an undergraduate. So there's a lot of similarities between graduate interviews and job interviews. But here they want to see if you're a perfect fit for their program. So one of the things they might ask is like your biggest challenge in college and how did you overcome it? Okay. They also would like to know if you found yourself in a situation, would you try to gather as much opinions as you can before you made a decision? They also would probably ask you about your presentation skills. So it's one thing to have research skills and conduct research and know how to do research, but it's another thing to be able to present it, because you could be the greatest researcher ever, but it's not going to matter in the end if you can't present it to other people as well. So those presentation skills are very important. And if you find yourself in a situation where you actually don't have any presentation skills right now, I believe CREP is doing some presentation skills workshops, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so CREP is having one more summer workshop tomorrow from 11 to 1 p.m. So if you're interested in doing that, then the sign up is in I believe it's a professional development channel in the Discord. So I think it's a good opportunity for you guys, and they have about 15 spots left. So I would get on that if I were you.
Thank you. Yeah, so also if you have questions on like presentation of what to do before like a poster or an oral presentation, you're more than welcome to ask us through the Discord or email. And if you request like for us to like have like a meeting on like sort of going over like how to do presentations, like please reach out. We'll be more than happy to do so. And we have, I believe, some ideas of like hosting our own research symposium. So that way you guys can get some experience presenting your research. More details to come in the future. But I know also the Office of Undergraduate Research also does Undergraduate Research Day as well. I'm not sure when those days are occurring, but that's something else to look out. So if you find within your school or outside your school, department, college, that they're hosting like a research symposium, I would go ahead and submit your research to that, because it's important to develop these skills. Got a little off track, but I feel like it was worth it to describe those things. Also, how do you feel about getting in front of a group and describing your personal accomplishments? Some people have no problems talking about themselves, but some other people get nervous, in front of a group, discussing themselves, because, it makes them feel uncomfortable. And, it's something that they would like to know about you. It's not that like they won't admit you if you are uncomfortable in front of groups of people. They just want to see if you have that issue, what are you doing about it? Because at one point you are going to have to get in front of a group of people and present yourself and your research. And if you have that issue going forward and you're not doing anything about it, that might raise a little red flag for them. But if you have that issue and you tell them that you are developing strategies on overcoming that issue, that sort of shows them that you know about the problem and you're working to resolve it. And that really shows initiative to resolve problems that you have or that are occurring. So now we'll talk about the resume. So from last time, just as a review, it should be about 1 page long. There's some resumes that are about like 2 pages, but at this point in your career, 1 page should be sufficient. You shouldn't try to go for 2 pages unless you're like a senior level, off, unless like you're in the senior level position and have a lot of experience and you feel like the extra page would warrant it. But again, try to keep it at 1 page. Should have your education, degree, school, GPA, graduation date, all that good stuff, relevant experience. So because it's 1 page, and if you have a lot of relevant experience, you're going to have to pick and choose which experiences you want to showcase. That same goes to skills and awards. You really have to play at it with the room that you got. I remember for my resume, one of the things I was doing, I was sort of like shrinking the borders on my page to try to fit as much as I could. You could do that as well, but you know, it's best to be clear and concise. So anywhere where you could like truncate a sentence to just a phrase and use bullet points, you know, that will help you. Try to be consistent in your resume. You know, this resume should be vetted thoroughly. There should be no grammar mistakes. You should really go through it, have someone else read it. I know the Career Services, they will help you like review your resume and give you pointers on where you can improve, and try to at least have a way of getting in contact with you. So have your email listed and sort of like on below your name. So where it says like your full name, try to have your email down there. I would probably advise against having your phone number there, because unless they request it, I would just put the email. That should be a sufficient way of reaching out to you. So when it comes to building the resume, I would start off by sort of listing all of your professional, academic, and research experiences. You know, just on a separate sheet of paper, just list them all and try to describe one as best you can for each experience. And so based on the program, you'll have to filter the list, okay? So there's going to be some experiences that aren't going to be really relevant to the program, or there might be too many experiences that are relevant to the program and you just can't fit them all. So you'll have to pick the most important ones. And it's typically best that you list them in chronological order. So maybe the first one being the most recent could work, or maybe you could try the oldest one first. Again, that comes down to personal preference, but it has to be, you have to be sure that it's in order, and try to have dates on those as well. For each experience, again, you want to talk about the job, the experience, what you contributed, what you learned, you know, maybe briefly describe what the aim of the research was that you were trying to accomplish, or what the research question was. For my resume, what I did as well is I also listed my mentors. So mentors being like my professor, PI, anyone else, any other graduate students that helped me accomplish stuff, or any other professors that were helping me advance my research. For your skills, try to list them all in that scratch sheet of paper. And again, you'll just have to choose which skills you want to showcase. If you can fit all of your skills in your resume, that's awesome. But if you're having a hard time doing so, what you could do is, what I did for me at least, is I had 2 sections, 2 bullet points. So one bullet point was software, and the other bullet point was hardware. So it's for like, as it's pretty obvious, software, I just like list out through comma, separated by commas. You know, I'm proficient in, you know, Python, G4 Beamline, GN4, Root, that sort of thing. And I list them all in the same bullet point, separated by commas. And then for hardware, you know, I can solder, I can work with 3D printers, you know, that sort of thing. If space is an issue, okay? You don't have to describe in depth each skill. You just have to sort of list off the main word that describes the skill. And if you got some awards, you know, best to show those off. Scholarships are awards. So if you received money, whether it was through like the FAFSA or through some other means, list those as well and pick the ones of most importance if you can't fit them all. I would also try to label the dates on when you received those awards as well. So even if say you want an internship and you didn't like follow through with that internship and you went through some other internship, I would still list that, but I would in parentheses say declined, because you still won that. You were still awarded that opportunity. You just went with another one. Okay. So some additional tips. Bullet points will help you out a lot in being concise. Do not use informal writing. So contractions. I know some of us are Texan and we like to use y'all, but try to be don't use y'all in your resume. Be sure to stay away from contractions. Try to be as formal as you can. Make sure that the font is clear. So at a readable size, so that's like 11 to 12 point minimum. The last thing you want is for the interviewer or the person who's reading your application to have to squint and read your resume. You may have to bold some headings, to separate some things, so that way things have different sections. Again, have UH Career Services review your resume. They will help you out a ton. I remember as a freshman, I made the stupid decision in making everything in my resume red. I don't know what was going through my head at the time. And they said, yeah, don't do that. Make it black and white. So be conscious about the space in your resume because it will fill up if you have a lot to talk about. And this is also very important because it will save you a lot of hassle. Make sure that your resume is in PDF. Don't save it in Word. Don't save it in some other file format. Save it in PDF because PDF is pretty immutable. Immutable being it won't be subject to change based on the program that's reading it. So how you save it as a PDF will remain the same way if someone else opens it. So it will save you a lot of formatting issues if another person opens your resume.
Here, I'll clarify that a little bit. You know how when you're in Word and you move like a picture 2 centimeters to the left and the entire document is like screwed up, that won't happen if you save it in PDF. So, and those of you who are in my class know, save it in PDF. That's the best way, because then also other people can't change it.
Also, Samia brought up a good point. LinkedIn on your resume. Yes, if you got a LinkedIn, make sure to link to it as well on your resume. If they're curious about more information, that is also another resource you can use. So good on that. Thank you. Also, if you don't have a LinkedIn, you can go ahead and make one just so you can have it. All right, just as a review from last time, it's Latin, the CV Curriculum Vitae, I think is how you pronounce it. It stands for Latin Course of Life. There's, again, no page limits, primarily used in academia and other industries as well. They'll specify if they want a CV or a resume. And again, this summarizes your career, your education, qualifications, experience, research projects, contributions, and the format depends on your field. So I would consult with your mentor or your professor about this and perhaps ask them for their CV so you can get an idea of what it looks like and how you can start formulating your own. Yeah, okay. So when it comes to building the CV, I would first begin by consulting your PI or mentor. This is a good place to sort of like have a meeting with them and talk about your experiences and sort of flush out the stuff that you want to present to people reading your application and CV. So it'll be similar to the resume where you're going to be listing all of your academic and professional research experiences. And rather than having to filter them out, you're going to list them chronologically. Try to list the location of every experience. If you had an experience outside of the University of Houston, say at another university, at a national lab, at a company, list that location so that they know. So say you worked at General Atomics for like an internship, list off General Atomics and where they're located in the United States. And so for each experience, you want to describe the project and the work, your contributions, and any important results that may have come out from your contributions or later on, saying how your work will impact something in the future. Try also to list presentation conferences and papers that you have. CVs are big on this as well. So if you presented, say, at a conference, whether that was like a poster or an oral presentation, I would list that as in the section that you would list off as presentations. Okay, I would list them chronologically. I would list off when, where, and what you did at that conference. Even if you were like a co-author and someone presented like a conference paper on your behalf, I would still list that as well, because your name is on that paper and your paper was presented at that conference. I would also list any honors, awards, or skills similar to the resume. And here's a good place to list off extracurricular activities. You're not limited by a page limit. It's a good time to discuss whether you've been involved in an organization, held a leadership position in those organizations, maybe did some volunteer work. And if that volunteer work is tied into what you're interested scientifically, that's pretty awesome. And that would be also awesome to showcase in your resume. So some additional tips for the CV. If you have a resume, I would start by adding and rearranging to that. Okay. Bullet points also help to organize your thoughts and being concise, but you don't have to use bullet points if you don't want to. Again, that comes down to a personal preference when it comes to CVs. Label each page with your name and page number. So sometimes they're not always going to look at your documents electronically. So what they might end up doing is they might just end up printing it all out, and it'll help them to stay organized if they have your name on each page on the CV and the page number associated with it. So that way they keep track of it and don't lose anything. So that way, if they know if they are missing a page, they don't just assume that you only have 2 pages rather than 3 pages for a CV if you submitted a 3-page CV. Okay. Try to have it in black and white. Again, PDF will help you with those formatting issues that Word has or any other program. For the conferences and presentations section. So there is no real format, at least in my field. I'm not sure if it's the same for other fields, but the way I've gone about it is somewhat similar to how I've referenced papers. So I have the names, last name first, followed by the initial of the first name, and then everyone who is involved, or et al. If it's a lot of people. I would then comma presentation name, what was the name of your poster, name of the presentation, comma the event. So let's say you presented at the National SACNAS conference that's coming up. So you list off the conference name in that, and then comma, list when that occurred, comma, location, online. So there's no real locations. You just say it was online. And then the format being, did you present like a poster, or did you present orally? Did you give a talk? All right. Again, have UH Career Services review it, as well as your PI, because they'll be able to give you some good pointers on how to structure your CV. And so when it comes to descriptions as well, don't be vague, and also don't use informal language. For these types of documents, you want to try to be as formal as you can. Is that it? Yeah. Oh yeah. I didn't make another slide about the end, but yeah, that's about it in terms of the CV. So
I'm gonna add a little aside on the CV part. So if you go into the professional development channel on the Discord and you scroll down in the pins, the very first message in the pins is a link to a Google Drive folder that has a lot of our CVs and resumes in there already. So if you want like kind of a template or something to look at to kind of start building your CV, if you don't know exactly how to approach it, then you can go and take a look at ours and see if that helps.
All right, thank you. And with that, that's about it in terms of presentation here. So if you got any questions, please feel free to ask them now.
If you don't have any questions, you can go ahead and log off. I'll be sending the recording later today.